Russia is conducting a profound modernization of its military forces that is based on a revision of strategic and doctrinal documents, as well as investment plans that are coupled with organizational reform of the entire defense establishment. From the conflict with Georgia to participation in the fighting in Syria, the Russian army has gone from being fresh out of the Soviet era to a modern and notoriously effective army. What method has Russia used to evolve its strategy, organization, and equipment? What are the evolutions of the Russian doctrine? How did the Russian army evolve in its functioning and its equipment according to the evolution of its perception of threats? More broadly, how is this evolution accompanied by changes in Russian society? In order to understand the reasons for this profound evolution, it is necessary to first understand the evolution of Russian strategic documents in order to understand the evolution of the perception of threats. Secondly, we will look at budgetary developments and the functioning of armament plans. This will be put in parallel with the organizational evolutions, as these themes are closely linked during this period. Then, the implications of these evolutions in the Russian society in the broad sense will be evoked. The observation of the strategic context analyzed at a time t, and the anticipation of the possible futures, orient the strategic vision of a nation. A certain number of documents translating these perceptions can then be written. Generally speaking, it is possible to observe the drafting of strategic reviews, which translate a vision of the world, and then of different military doctrines, which set out the fundamental principles that guide the organization of the armed forces, and the principles of their use. Russia's key strategic documents are detailed in its 2014 Military Doctrine, 2015 National Security Strategy, 2016 Foreign Policy Concept, 2017 Naval Strategy, and 2020 Nuclear Deterrence Strategy Principles. The 2014 Military Doctrine document divides the nature of threats into two categories: military risks and military threats. Military risks are a lesser designation, defined as situations that could lead to a military threat under certain conditions. A military threat is characterized by a real possibility of a military conflict breaking out. Once fighting breaks out, Russian military theory and doctrine identifies a typology of conflict related to the extent and type of conflict, and progressively increasing in intensity: armed conflict, local war, regional war, large-scale war, and world war. These levels of conflict are important for understanding how the Russian military views the scope, nature, actors, and escalation levels of war. Russian actions in Ukraine have been characterized by extensive use of non-state armed actors, information and disinformation operations, and other non-kinetic strategies. Modern warfare is increasingly defined by a mix of non-kinetic tactics and conventional military forces. What may be called New Generation Warfare, NGW, describes an approach to modern warfare that encompasses a range of political, military, informational, and economic tools across situations and locations. This concept, which is part of the 2014 paper, does not reduce the importance of military power. Indeed, it recognizes the additional importance of non-kinetic and asymmetric tools. While the 2010 Russian military doctrine finds NATO's potential encroachment into Russia's near-broad worrisome, the 2014 doctrine qualifies it as an established reality. Thus, the 2014 military doctrine notes several dangers facing Russia, such as the strengthening of NATO's international role and military capabilities. The preferred solution to the challenges lies in a profound restructuring and modernization of the armed forces. In view of the technological level reached by NATO, priority is given to the development and use of advanced weapons and equipment. Hypersonic and high-precision weapons are among the capabilities sought, as is the development of improved information and control systems. At the strategic level, the doctrine reminds us that nuclear weapons remain the ultimate guarantee of the country's defense and security. The modernization of Russian forces requires the strengthening of the national military scientific potential and a strong and autonomous defense industry. In order to deal with threats from a world of increasing instability, Russia's defense and deterrence posture must be strengthened by a whole-of-government, whole-of-society approach. One result of this vision was the creation in 2016 of the National Guard. Russia has split the perceived threat into two very distinct components. First, the threat posed by military technologies is identified. They can have a multiplier effect on forces and mobility. These technologies are pushing Russia to modernize its entire defense apparatus. Secondly, the fear of foreign manipulation that could jeopardize the country's internal stability is mentioned. The GPV 2020 armament program should therefore make it possible to respond to the concerns arising from the first type of threat. Russian military doctrine emphasizes a broader concept of deterrence than simply nuclear deterrence. Referred to as strategic deterrence in official Russian military doctrine, this concept includes nuclear weapons, conventional strategic weapons, and non-military measures in peacetime and in conflict. In June 2020, for the first time, Russia publicly reveals its official nuclear deterrence policy. The document is entitled Basic Principles of the State Policy of the Russian Federation in the Field of Nuclear Deterrence. In this document, Russia seeks to set out the nature of the threats and conditions for the use of nuclear weapons, as well as its overall strategy for nuclear deterrence. Recall that in the 1990s, Russia's conventional military weakness forced military doctrine to rely heavily on nuclear weapons, including strategic and non-strategic nuclear weapons. Then, in the 2000s, as its conventional capabilities developed, military doctrine recognized the importance of strategic conventional weapons. Today, conventional weapons play an important role in Russia's concept of deterrence, although the Russian military considers its deterrence capabilities insufficient on their own. As a result, many analysts argue that Russia maintains an escalation for de-escalation strategy, in which it might threaten to use nuclear weapons at the onset of a crisis if it were to risk losing a conflict. Russia's military strategy identifies the use of kinetic force as a component in support of broader political or diplomatic objectives. Rather than seeking to dominate a battle space, Russia prioritizes flexibility and the ability to adapt to changing conditions in a conflict. Russia's preference for the measured use of force, however, does not imply a trade-off between the decisive use of military power and escalation management. Russian military strategy prioritizes the threat of further sanctions. Thus, military power is calibrated to change the situation on the ground and to demonstrate the potential for further escalation. Operationally, Russia has historically emphasized offensive mass-fire strategies. The concentrated use of artillery and rocket launchers, as well as large tank units, remains central to Russian military doctrine. Russia combines this operational strategy with a growing desire for coordination and integration between the different branches of the military. Russia sees this integration as crucial to the creation of joint armies. Russian forces are widely dispersed due to the country's geography. This joint approach is important for Russia to address threats in multiple directions. Russia's military doctrine focuses on the initial period of the war. Russia fears a large-scale surprise attack. The Russian government perceives its own demographic, economic, and technological limitations in the event of a long-term conflict. This type of conflict could pit Russia against the United States and/or NATO. The latter could use long-range precision strike capabilities from air and sea platforms. These capabilities pose a serious threat to Russia's command and control capabilities and vital infrastructure. The Russian army is well aware of Western capabilities and recognizes that modern warfare is defined by speed and technological sophistication. Therefore, the Russian military is influenced by an offensive doctrine that guides its concepts of deterrence and defense. Russian military doctrine seeks to engage and resolve conflicts decisively. It seeks to disrupt, divert, and ultimately punish an attacker in the early stages of a conflict. Finally, Russia's defenses are designed to operate in coordination with other capabilities to target and degrade an adversary's critical infrastructure and combat support capability. To implement these strategic and doctrinal directions, Russia has developed a set of weapons programs and structural reforms that will be discussed in the next section.